It was just another late night at the office, until my boss closed my laptop, looked straight into my eyes, and said, "Now focus on me." From that moment, nothing between us felt the same. The office had emptied hours ago, yet I stayed, my eyes glued to the pale glow of my laptop. The hum of the fluorescent lights above and the steady rhythm of my typing were the only sounds left in the building. I told myself it was discipline, dedication, but truthfully, it was avoidance. The silence of my apartment always felt heavier than the silence of this place. I didn't notice her at first. My boss. She moved quietly, as if the long corridors of this office belonged to her alone, which in a way, they did. When she finally spoke, her voice cut through the stillness, low and steady, carrying both authority and an almost maternal warmth. "You're still here?" I looked up, startled. There she was, elegant in her fitted blazer, her hair falling just past her shoulders. She was in her early 40s, confident, composed, and undeniably beautiful in a way that didn't demand attention but commanded it. Even the dim desk lamp seemed to soften in her presence. "I just wanted to finish these reports," I said quickly, though my words felt clumsy under her gaze. She stepped closer, the faint sound of her heels against the polished floor echoing in the quiet. There was no perfume heavy in the air, just a subtle trace of something clean, something distinctly her, drifting as she passed behind me. I felt it before I registered it, a delicate presence brushing against the edges of my concentration. "You'll burn yourself out if you keep this up," she said. It wasn't scolding, more like concern disguised as practicality. I glanced up at her again. The glow from my screen reflected in her eyes, making them seem softer, almost curious. I caught myself studying the lines of her face, not with judgment, but with quiet admiration. They weren't flaws. They were proof of a life lived with intensity, of decisions made, burdens carried, and victories earned. "Someone has to keep up," I answered with a half-smile, though my chest tightened as I spoke. I didn't mean it as a challenge, but the words hung between us longer than I expected. Her lips curved slightly, not quite a smile, not quite dismissal. She leaned against the edge of my desk, her hand resting just inches from mine. I froze, acutely aware of how near she was, how the space around me suddenly felt smaller, warmer. "You remind me of myself when I was your age," she said softly. The way she looked at me then wasn't just professional interest. There was recognition, almost a kind of nostalgia. I swallowed, the weight of her words pressing against the silence. For the first time, I felt that maybe she saw me, not just as an employee buried under spreadsheets, but as a person. And in that instant, with her standing so close, I realized that this night, this conversation, was already leading somewhere I hadn't dared to imagine. Her presence lingered beside me, her hand resting on the desk as if she belonged there. I tried to return to the spreadsheet, to let the endless rows of numbers shield me from the tension building in the air. But her silence was louder than the tapping of keys, and my focus kept slipping away. Finally, she leaned closer, her voice low, deliberate, and impossible to ignore. "Shut that laptop," she said. The words weren't barked like an order. They were firm, yes, but softened by something else, something that made my pulse quicken. My fingers hovered above the keyboard, suddenly unsure. I looked up, and her eyes were steady on mine. Not cold. Not impatient. Just, certain. For a moment, I hesitated. Closing that laptop felt like crossing a line. That glow on the screen was safe, predictable. She was not. But there was something in her tone, an unspoken invitation, a challenge laced with care, that pulled me toward obedience. With a slow breath, I lowered the lid. The click of its shutting echoed louder than it should have in the empty office. It was as if the whole building had just shifted, and now the night was hers to command. Her lips curved into a small, knowing smile, as if she could see my hesitation, as if she understood what that tiny act had cost me. She shifted her weight, leaning against the desk edge, her arm brushing the corner of my chair. The distance between us had shrunk, and with it, my ability to pretend this was just another late night at work. "That's better," she murmured. The air felt different now. Thicker. Charged. The laptop, the reports, the deadlines, all forgotten in a single heartbeat. She wanted my attention, fully and completely, and I found myself powerless to resist. "I've watched you," she continued, her voice softer now, almost reflective. "You push yourself harder than anyone here. You don't know how to stop." Her nails tapped lightly against the polished wood of the desk, an absent rhythm, but each sound landed like a pulse in my chest. I wanted to say something, anything, but my throat tightened. "You're young," she went on, tilting her head slightly, eyes narrowing with a mix of concern and something unspoken. "You think burning the candle at both ends will get you where you want to go. But it only leaves ashes." Her words settled heavily, but not unkindly. She wasn't scolding me. She was revealing a truth she had lived through, one she didn't want me to repeat. And in that moment, I saw the quiet vulnerability beneath her confidence, the side of her that carried more weight than anyone ever noticed. I leaned back in my chair, feeling both disarmed and seen. Her nearness, her voice, the warmth in her gaze, it was overwhelming. And yet, for reasons I couldn't explain, I didn't want to pull away. She wanted my focus. And she had it. Completely, the office felt different with the laptop closed, as though some invisible weight had lifted from the room. Without the hum of the screen and the tapping of keys, there was only quiet, soft, still, almost fragile. She didn't leave. Instead, she moved past me, toward the small break area in the corner, her heels whispering against the floor. "Come on," she said, glancing back over her shoulder. "Coffee. You need something stronger than spreadsheets to keep you awake." Her tone was lighter now, carrying the kind of ease you rarely hear from her during the day. I followed, not because I needed the caffeine, but because something in me needed to follow her. She poured us both mugs, the steam curling upward in little ribbons that blurred the city lights beyond the window. We sat across from each other at the small round table, the distance suddenly feeling too formal. She broke it first, her fingers wrapping around her cup as she leaned forward, elbows resting lightly on the surface. "You know," she began, her voice softer now, "I used to do exactly what you're doing. Staying late. Chasing perfection. Believing that if I worked harder than everyone else, I'd get somewhere faster." Her eyes drifted to the window, reflecting the glow of the skyline. For a second, she looked far away, back to another time, another version of herself. "And did it work?" I asked quietly. She gave a small laugh, but it wasn't unkind. "I got here, didn't I? But I lost more than I gained along the way." The honesty in her words caught me off guard. She didn't speak like a boss lecturing an employee. She spoke like a woman confessing something she hadn't admitted in a long time. I wrapped my hands around my mug, letting the warmth soak into my palms. "I admire you," I said before I could stop myself. "The way you carry so much, the way you never let it show. It's inspiring." Her eyes found mine then, steady, searching. For a heartbeat, it felt like she was trying to see if I meant it, or maybe she already knew. Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "You're too young to admire me," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "I don't think admiration has an age," I replied, my tone low but sincere. For the first time that night, she laughed fully, the sound rich and warm, filling the empty space around us. And when she reached across the table to take the mug from my hand, her fingers brushed against my wrist. It was nothing more than a light touch, the kind that could have passed unnoticed. But I felt it linger, sparking through me like electricity. Her hand withdrew slowly, deliberately, as though she, too, had felt the charge between us. And in that moment, the coffee was no longer the thing keeping me awake. It was her. We lingered in the break area longer than I expected, sipping what was left of the coffee, letting our words meander between work and pieces of life outside of it. But at some point, the conversation slowed, then softened, until silence became its own kind of language between us. She was the one who suggested we move. "Come on," she said, gesturing toward the windowed corner of the office where a low sofa Saturday will be more comfortable there. The city stretched out beyond the glass, rain just beginning to fall, streaking the view with silver lines. The sound of it drummed softly against the glass, a steady rhythm that seemed to hush the world outside. We sat side by side, though not too close at first. The sofa was wide enough for distance, yet somehow that space felt charged, like it wasn't meant to stay empty for long. Our words came slower now, spoken in quieter tones, as though the storm outside had drawn us into a smaller, more intimate world. She told me about her favorite places to travel, how she longed to go back to them but rarely found the time anymore. I listened, not just to her words, but to the unguarded way she said them, softer, freer than I'd ever heard in the daylight hours of the office. I found myself leaning slightly closer without realizing it, drawn in by the warmth of her voice. And when I did, I noticed just how close our knees had become. Not touching, but almost. A breath of space between us that carried more weight than physical contact ever could. She didn't move away. If anything, her posture mirrored mine, her shoulders shifting toward me as she leaned back into the cushions. The faint scent of her hair brushed past, clean and subtle, stirring something inside me I couldn't quite put into words. The silence returned again, but it was no longer awkward. It was charged, alive, filled with every unspoken thought neither of us dared to name. Her gaze drifted to the window, then slowly back to me. For a moment, our eyes held. Longer this time. Steadier. It was the kind of look that carried no instructions, no professional roles, no boundaries. It was simply human. I swallowed hard, aware of how my chest rose and fell, aware of how my hands wanted to close the distance but remained still, respectful, waiting. Her hair slipped forward as she tilted her head, brushing lightly against the sleeve of my shirt. Such a small thing. Yet I felt it as if the world had narrowed down to that single point of contact. The rain outside grew heavier, a quiet storm against the glass, but in that moment, it only deepened the cocoon we had fallen into. We weren't speaking anymore. We didn't need to. The nearness was saying everything. The quiet between us grew heavier, not uncomfortable but undeniable. The nearness, the silence, the way her hair had brushed my sleeve, it all lingered, asking questions neither of us was ready to answer. And then, as if suddenly aware of how close we had drifted, she pulled back. It wasn't abrupt, but it carried weight, like she was physically drawing a line that her heart hadn't wanted to draw. She folded her arms across her chest, the movement both protective and distant, though her eyes betrayed something softer. "This isn't right," she said at last, her voice steady but faintly trembling. "I'm your boss." The words hung in the air, heavy, like raindrops pressing against the window before falling. My chest tightened. Of course she was right. There were rules, expectations, reputations to protect. But the way she said it, it wasn't cold dismissal. It was struggle. I took a slow breath, forcing myself not to reach for her, even though every part of me wanted to close the distance she had just created. "I know," I said gently. "And I don't want to disrespect that. Or you." Her eyes flickered toward me, quick, almost searching. She wanted reassurance, but she was also afraid of it. I could see it in the way her shoulders rose slightly, her arms still folded like armor. "I've worked too hard to get here," she whispered. "Too hard to let feelings complicate things." The last word caught in her throat, soft, almost reluctant to exist. "Feelings," I echoed, more softly than I intended. My voice wasn't questioning her, it was confessing my own. She closed her eyes briefly, as if that single word had unsettled something she had kept locked away. The rain outside grew louder, tapping harder against the glass, filling the silence we couldn't "I don't want to ruin this," she said finally, her voice breaking just enough to reveal the truth beneath her composure. "Not for you. Not for me." I leaned forward, resting my forearms on my knees, keeping my tone calm, deliberate, steady. "You wouldn't ruin anything. Not for me. I respect you, more than anyone else I've ever worked for. That doesn't change. Whatever this moment means, whatever happens after tonight, that respect will always be there." For a long moment, she said nothing. Her arms slowly loosened, dropping from the tight fold into something more open, her fingers resting lightly on the space between us. It was such a small movement, but it felt monumental. Her breathing steadied, though her eyes were still conflicted. Vulnerable. She wasn't the untouchable boss right now. She was a woman, fighting with herself, with rules she had lived by for years, and with a pull she could no longer deny. I didn't touch her. I let the space remain, let her hand linger on the cushion between us. But inside, I felt the shift. The wall she had tried to put up wasn't as strong as it used to be, the rain outside had turned into a steady downpour, drumming against the glass with a rhythm that felt almost deliberate, like nature itself was marking the weight of this moment. She sat beside me, her hand still resting near mine on the cushion, open now, no longer folded into herself. Her eyes were distant, watching the rain streak down the window. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than I'd ever heard it, softer than the late-night coffee chats, softer than the careful advice she had given me. It wasn't the voice of my boss. It was simply her. "Do you know what the hardest part of this job is?" she asked, almost as if she wasn't sure I would answer. I shook my head, waiting. "It's the loneliness," she whispered. "People see the position, the authority, the corner office. They think it means you have everything. But most days, it feels like I have no one. No one I can really talk to, no one I can lean on." Her words hung in the quiet, heavier than any confession she had made before. My throat tightened as I realized how rare it must be for her to admit something like that. The woman I admired for her confidence, her composure, was allowing me to see the cost of it all. "You don't seem lonely," I said carefully, though the truth of her words had already sunk into me. She gave a small, sad smile. "That's the point. You're not supposed to see it." The honesty cut through me. Without thinking, I shifted closer, my knee brushing hers for the first time. She didn't move away. If anything, her hand, the one still resting between us, tilted slightly, her fingers grazing mine. The contact was tentative, almost questioning. I let my palm open, slow and steady, offering rather than taking. She hesitated, then allowed her fingers to slide into mine. Her touch was light at first, almost fragile, but it stayed. The weight of her trust hit me harder than any storm outside. "I don't know why I'm telling you this," she admitted, her voice trembling now. "I've spent years keeping these walls up. And here I am, breaking them down in front of you." I tightened my hold on her hand, not too much, just enough to tell her it was safe. "Maybe you don't need the walls tonight," I said quietly. Her eyes lifted to mine, steady now, though glassy with emotion. The distance between us had shrunk in every way that mattered. There was no hierarchy here, no rules, no labels, just two people who had finally stopped hiding. The moment stretched, suspended. My chest tightened, not with fear, but with the sheer enormity of what she was allowing me to see. She was strong, yes, but right now, she was letting me witness the side of her that wasn't. And to me, that was more powerful than anything else. Her hand stayed in mine. Neither of us let go. The rain softened after a while, its once urgent rhythm calming to a gentler drizzle against the glass. The storm had passed, but its echo lingered, much like the silence between us. Only now, that silence wasn't heavy with conflict. It was warm. Steady. Her hand was still in mine, her fingers resting with the quiet assurance of someone who had finally stopped resisting. I could feel the faint rhythm of her pulse against my palm, steady and human, reminding me this was real. This wasn't a dream brought on by fatigue or late-night coffee. She was here. She was choosing to stay. She shifted slightly, her shoulder brushing against mine, before leaning closer. When her head rested against my shoulder, I felt the weight of it, the soft press of her hair against my cheek, the warmth of her body easing into mine. My arm moved naturally, wrapping gently around her, not to claim her, but to hold her, to tell her without words that she was safe here. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The world outside blurred through the streaks on the window, the city glowing faintly beneath the softened rain. It felt as though we had slipped into our own small corner of time, one where titles, roles, and expectations didn't exist. "I can't remember the last time I felt this at peace," she murmured finally, her voice muffled against my chest. I swallowed, my hand brushing slowly along her arm, feeling the delicate shiver her body gave in response. "Then don't let go of it," I whispered. "Not tonight." Her breath rose and fell against me, steadying as she exhaled. She didn't answer, but she didn't need to. The way she nestled just a little closer said more than words ever could. I thought about everything that had led us here, the quiet nights she must have spent alone, the long days I had spent trying to prove myself, the invisible walls we had both carried. Tonight, those walls had cracked, not in some dramatic collapse, but in a simple choice to sit closer, to be honest, to let silence be enough. Eventually, she lifted her head just enough to meet my eyes. There was no hesitation now, no shield of authority or carefully measured professionalism. Just her. A woman who had allowed herself to be seen, and who had chosen, against all the rules she had written for herself, to let me stay close. Her lips curved into the smallest smile, one so fragile and real it made my chest ache. "You should probably go home soon," she said softly. "Probably," I agreed. But neither of us moved. Because home didn't feel like an empty apartment anymore. It felt like this, her warmth against me, her trust resting quietly in my arms, the storm outside easing into calm. The laptop was forgotten. The deadlines, too. All that mattered was her head on my shoulder, her hand in mine, and the quiet promise that whatever tomorrow brought, tonight had changed everything.